Today I want to talk about manipulation, and not from the perspective of the person experiencing it or from the perspective of somebody guessing at another person's motives, but I want to talk about it from the perspective of the person actually doing it. A few years ago, I was in a relationship that eventually became something of a case study. The person I was with openly acknowledged that he had narcissistic traits and patterns that were creating problems in his relationships. He wanted to understand those patterns. He said he wanted to change them. And at the time, I believed that if somebody could become aware of what they were doing and why they were doing it, eventually they would be able to change it, like make a different decision. My theory was pretty simple. Once you truly see something, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the mechanism, you have the opportunity to make different choices. Whether that theory was right or wrong is a conversation for another day. But because he wanted to better understand himself, he became a willing participant in that process. I would ask questions and give him reflective exercises. I would challenge him to examine his motives and behaviors. And every now and then I would get an answer that was actually surprisingly honest. One of those answers is what I want to talk about today. At one point, I gave him a writing prompt. The prompt asked him to describe a time when he knew the right thing to do but chose not to do it. I asked what story he told himself to justify it and what emotion he was avoiding, how that avoidance contributed to manipulation, and what honesty would have looked like instead. One part of his response immediately stood out to me. He wrote, "I tried to control the narrative of how I would be seen." That sentence is incredibly important because I think it explains something that many people misunderstand about manipulation. Most people think manipulation is primarily about controlling another person's behavior, but often it's really just about controlling another person's perception. If I can influence how you see me, I can influence how you feel about me. If I can influence how you feel about me, I can influence the decisions you make. And suddenly, we're no longer dealing with honesty, we're dealing with image management. The context behind his answer was that he had been asked to explain what love meant to him. His first response was rejected by me because I knew that it wasn't honest. And when he reflected on why he had answered the way he did, he admitted that he wasn't telling the truth about what he actually felt. He was saying what he believed another person wanted to hear. Now, I want you to pay attention to what happened next, because this is where the psychology gets interesting. When he was asked why he did that, he didn't say it was because he enjoyed lying or that it was because he wanted to hurt somebody. He said it was because he was afraid, specifically afraid of being seen. He was afraid that if he revealed what he genuinely thought and felt, the other person would withdraw. The relationship might change. He might lose the outcome he wanted, and that is where the manipulation began. Not with the false answer, but with the fear. The false answer was simply the strategy used to manage the fear. So think about that for a moment. The sequence was not manipulation first, fear second. The sequence was fear, avoidance, image management, manipulation. And that matters because it helps us understand what is actually happening beneath the surface. The person is experiencing an uncomfortable emotion. They don't want to experience that emotion, and instead of tolerating it, they attempt to manage somebody else's perception of reality. The goal becomes for preventing the consequence that they fear. In this case, the feared consequence was rejection. Now, understanding that doesn't excuse it, and I think that's where people can sometimes get confused. Explaining behavior is not the same thing as justifying behavior. Understanding why something happens doesn't make it acceptable. It simply helps us recognize it more clearly. One of the most revealing parts of his response was when he admitted that he was presenting a version of himself that wasn't authentic because he believed the truth might cost him the relationship. So think about what that means. What he was essentially saying was, if you knew what I actually thought, you might make a different choice. And that's a powerful statement because healthy relationships depend on informed choices. For someone to freely choose you, they have to know who they're choosing. They have to know what is real and what is true. The moment we begin editing reality in order to increase the likelihood of getting a desired outcome, we have crossed into manipulation, obviously. And manipulation isn't always about getting somebody to do something. Sometimes it's about preventing them from making a different decision, or preventing them from leaving, or preventing them from changing their mind, or preventing them from seeing information that would influence their choices. And that's obviously why manipulation and honesty cannot coexist. Honesty allows people to make informed decisions. Manipulation attempts to influence those decisions by controlling the information available to them. The more I studied these responses, the more I noticed the same pattern was appearing over and over again. It was just fear of consequence, rejection, losing control, being seen accurately. And then as a result, there was that attempt to shape perception, an attempt to influence reality rather than simply just participate in it. And that's when the mechanism becomes visible. The curtain was pulled back, so to speak. And instead of seeing manipulation as some mysterious thing that only certain people do, we could see the actual process unfolding step by step. And once you recognize that sequence, you can notice it, not just in other people, but sometimes in yourself. Because if we're being honest, most human beings have, at some point in their lives, been tempted to manage perception instead of embracing truth. The difference is whether we're willing to acknowledge it, whether we're willing to examine it, and whether we're willing to choose honesty, even when honesty carries a cost. Because the truth is that authenticity always carries risk. People may reject it or dislike it, but when somebody chooses you after seeing what's real, at least the choice belongs to them. And that's something that manipulation can never provide.